Today's video is about a systems thinking lens on the economics discipline, and specifically on understanding why economics is resistant to change. A little bit of background. Imago's mission is changing development thinking and practices around poverty alleviation. In our work, we want to use economics as an agent for new thinking and development because it has useful frameworks, but also because of its prominence in the discourse. Quickly, we came to realize that there is some resistance in economics, and this video is our attempt to understand why there is a resistance to change in economics, but also what we can do to continue pushing boundaries of development thinking. And so, our agenda today is to first look at, is economics resistant to change? And we're going to argue yes by a huge margin. And so note that any system is typically resistant to change, and as individuals or humans we also have a natural resistance to change. There's always some inertia or status quo bias, but we want to see if there is resistance to change relative to other disciplines. And so after that, we look at why is there some rigidity, and we look at some reinforcing feedback loops. Then we look at what keeps these feedback loops alive, and we argue that there are three things that keep it alive: insularity, lack of diversity, and superiority. And then we go into what is economics missing because of the resistance to change, and what are some levers we can use to improve the system. And so, is economics resistance to change? So, the next three slides look into a paper that tries to measure paradigm shifts in different disciplines. And paradigm shifts are revolutions that change the thinking, language, and discourse in a particular discipline. And so, what this paper does is a textual analysis of the literature. And by literature, I mean textual analysis of academic journals, reviews, and papers. And as the simplest example of a paradigm shift comes from physics. The language in physics, moved from sort of Newtonian mechanics to relativity and now quantum mechanics. So this paper measures paradigm shifts across disciplines in three dimensions, the first of which is consensus. So consensus measures the concentration of disciplinary language in a few keywords. So on the left, the graph here shows the level of consensus for natural and social sciences. So natural sciences, being older and more established, have a lot more consensus than the social sciences. But economics has the highest consensus among the social sciences. So what does that mean? So it is a bit of a double-edged sword. On one hand, it shows economics has a very strong core theory, but it also means it legitimates particular theories, questions, and methods over others, and also narrows the scope of what practitioners are legitimately able to ask and do. In some ways, it narrows really the debate. So it's one sign of a potential resistance to change. When we say concentration in a few keywords, a good example is the notion of equilibrium. So in economics, there is a consensus about equilibrium, which on one hand tells us we have a very strong core theory, but it also means that every problem is discussed from the purview of equilibrium, which in some way narrows the scope. So the second dimension of measuring a paradigm shift is rapid discovery at the periphery. So rapid discovery at the periphery for a discipline measures the raw proportion of overlapping words across time periods. And the way they measure this is using a binary representation, so 0-1 representation of each word's presence or absence. And typically greater rapid discovery at the periphery means the disciplinary language exhibits more change over time. And it would mean that new discoveries usurp old ones frequently over time. So economics, as you see on the graph to the left, has the lowest rapid discovery at the periphery among all disciplines, and especially, I guess, the relevant comparison set being the social sciences. It's the lowest among the social sciences. So this more clear is a more clear sign of resistance to change, because there's little rapid discovery and new discoveries in economics, at least, do not easily usurp old ones and frequently over time. And so the third dimension of measuring paradigm shifts is stability of core concepts. Stability of core concepts, it measures the degree to which the language that is retained in a discipline over time is central to the disciplinary discourse. And economics, as you can see on the left, has the highest stability of core concepts among the social sciences. It shows that ideas retained over time are often used in a disciplinary discourse. And so some examples in economics would be equilibrium or causality. These are core ideas that have been retained over time and become central to the disciplinary discourse. So if we look back at evidence from this one paper, we see that economics has the highest consensus, so in some ways the least debate. It has the lowest rate of rapid discovery at the periphery, and it has the highest stability among all other social sciences, such as psychology, sociology, and political science. So these are all of these things point to our signs of a system that is truly resistant to change. So moving on to other evidence. So this is really only for American economists, but the takeaway here is that American economists are the only social scientists for whom a majority does not believe in interdisciplinary knowledge. So this is a survey, and participants were asked if they agree or disagree with the following proposition, which is, in general, interdisciplinary knowledge is better than knowledge obtained by a single discipline. And so economists are the only social scientists who disagree or strongly disagree with this statement in a majority. So nearly 60% of economists disagree that interdisciplinary knowledge is better than knowledge obtained by a single discipline. And this is in sharp contrast to all other university professors in sociology, political science, psychology, finance, and history, in which about 60 to 86% agree that interdisciplinary knowledge is indeed better than knowledge obtained by a single discipline. And so this points to some resistance to be open to other ideas from other fields, but also some sort of superiority, which we'll touch upon in some of the later slides. And this is another way of really saying the same thing. The takeaway here being that top economics journals cite top journals in other relevant fields the least. And so we'll look at the circles first. So the first circle, what it's saying on the top is that 0.8% of citations in the American Economic Review come from the top 25 political science journals. The reverse, which is 4.1% of citations in the American Political Science Review come from the top 25 economics journals. So that's 5 times more that political science reviews cite the top economics journals as opposed to the opposite. And similarly, the same story in sociology. So what you see is that sociology cites top 25 economics journals about 7 times more than economics cites the sociology journals. That, in some sense, is very revealing. And so if you look at the diagonals, the American Economic Review, which by the way is a top economics journal, cites top 25 economic journals 40.3% of the time. And this is a lot more than the American Political Science Review cites itself, and it's a lot, which is 17.5%, and it's a lot more than what the American Sociological Review cites itself, or by itself, I mean really the top 25 sociology journals, which is 22%. And so all of these really point to the fact that economics is indeed resistant to change. But what is causing it? And so we look at feedback loops to understand what really in the system is causing this. So this is one hypothesis of what might be causing this resistance to change, and it has to do with academic incentives. So I'm going to walk through each of these one by one. So we start I guess we start in a system in which top economics departments have a majority of mathematical and neoclassical thinkers. And this is currently true. So economics departments today indeed have a majority of mathematical and neoclassical thinkers. And so this has to be combined with the fact that journals are ranked by the number of citations by authors in the field. So top journals are the ones that have most citations by authors in the field. And so if you combine the first two facts, when most authors are neoclassical, the most cited journals are neoclassical journals. And so top journals are neoclassical and mathematical in nature. And given that is true, top economics departments really want to publish in top journals because they're widely circulated. And so the top economics departments, they recruit PhD candidates with strong math backgrounds to publish in these top journals. And these strong math backgrounds typically come from engineering or just, pure natural sciences that typically have a lot of mathematics in them. And given this is the cohort that typically enters a PhD program in economics, they're naturally inclined to favor mathematical approaches and equilibrium economics, given their background in the natural sciences. But even if they were disinclined to follow these approaches, the incentives for a PhD student is to publish in top journals because that they're more prestigious, but also it significantly improves their job prospects. So there is a push for them to inevitably produce in neoclassical and mathematical journals. And so eventually PhD students do publish in the top journals and become part, these top journals are neoclassical and become part of economics departments, further reinforcing the majority of neoclassical and mathematical thinkers in top economics departments. This is a reinforcing positive loop in that the majority that existed in the beginning of neoclassical and mathematical thinkers in top economics departments, that continues to grow and grow. And so what this means is that neoclassical or mathematical thinking dominates top journals, while new thinking is relegated to lesser journals which are not read. And the implication is that there's onus on frequent publishers of top journals to make a change, but the change is often within narrow mathematical confines. So this is one potential positive feedback loop that ensures that one kind of thinking, neoclassical and mathematical thinking, dominates, and while other thinkings are relegated. The other kind of feedback loop is more perverse and involves what Joe Stiglitz called the revolving door. So we'll start from the left. There is a nexus between academia, private sector, and the government that maintains the status quo. And this is especially true in economics. So economists are very powerful beings, and they often get their fees and are on the boards of many top financial and consulting firms. And another caveat is that economists don't have to disclose these conflict of interest engagements when publishing. And so economists frequently, publish works that are favorable to the firms that pay them or the ones they represent in the boards. And in publishing these favorable works, they're more likely to be on these boards. And so this loop is another reinforcing positive loop. It's partly inspired by Inside Job, which was a documentary on the 2008 financial crisis. So below are some examples of academics who were either paid by government or on the board of financial firms that were mentioned in the movie Inside Job. Since then, so the academia has tried to introduce more rules to disclose conflict of interest, but it's still not mainstream or as strict as it should be. And finally, there is $1 billion industry of selling academic expertise to testify in defense of financial agencies. And this includes firms like Analysis Group, Charles River Associates, Cornerstone Research. These are economic consulting firms. The second feedback loop, which is a revolving door, means that economists move seamlessly between financial firms, the World Bank, and governments. So Typically, senior policy officials in the government take up post-retirement jobs at the IMF or World Bank or even consulting. And while in government, for this reason, they have an inclination to appease World Bank or IMF to guarantee post-retirement jobs. And as a result, economists and governments tend to publish works that are favorable to the World Bank or IMF or consulting firms. So this is a revolving door, and like, I guess an example would be that, suppose the World Bank favors liberalization, then people in government would push for it because they want World Bank jobs. And so there's no real challenge to liberalization as a concept, and as a result, the status quo is emphasized. Another reason, that explains potentially this rigidity. And so now we have seen, evidence that economics is resistant to change, and that, there's some feedback loops that cause this resistance to change. But what keeps these feedback loops alive? And there are three reasons: insularity, lack of diversity, and superiority. So we'll start with insularity. The insularity of the economics profession and power structures within it makes it an elite exclusive club resistant to change. And so there are three pieces of evidence that sort of point towards that direction. So the first is that getting a job as an economics professor is collectively managed across departments of different universities by the same criteria. And so this is in sharp contrast again to other social sciences, where there is no clarity as to what is a good sociologist or what is a good political scientist. But in economics, there is some notion of what is a good economist, which means that there's no debate about what a good economist should be, and it leads to the same kind of economics. And it also means that if you don't conform to the idea of what is a good economist, you're labeled a bad economist. So that's one piece of evidence that points in that direction. Second, a lot of top programs in economics publish disproportionately in top journals. So it is in some sense a very elite and exclusive club. So if we look at economics, so 37.5% of authors in top journals publish in the top 5 economics departments. And this is relative to 22.3% of authors in top journals in sociology publishing in the top 5 sociology departments. And similarly, 56.7% of authors in top journals in economics typically have a PhD from the top 5 economics departments. And this is relative to 35.4% in sociology. So at least relative to sociology, it seems that economics is highly concentrated in either the top 5 departments or is concentrated with people who have a PhD from the top 5 departments. And I think this becomes even more stark when you look at professional associations in economics. So the American Economic Association has 72% of its members in the top 5 departments. And this is much, much more the American Political Science Association and the American Sociological Association. So the first thing keeping these feedback loops alive is insularity. The second is a lack of diversity, because it constrains the range of issues addressed and limits collective ability to understand familiar issues from new and innovative perspectives. And so on the left, we have the percentage of doctorate degrees awarded to women, and economics is by far the lowest among all other disciplines listed here. So it's lower than other social sciences, business, STEM, the humanities. And similarly, when you look at percentage of doctorate degrees awarded to minority students, again, economics is the lowest relative to STEM, business, social sciences, and the humanities. And I guess there's also this, article by Arvind Subramaniam. He wrote a paper about how in development economics, a lot of people are not from developing countries. And so this is another, I guess, way of speaking about a lack of diversity. And it again, keeps this resistance to change because the sameness in sort of composition of economists in terms of gender and race affects the kind of ideas uh, which are less open to new perspectives. Um, and finally, there's a superiority of economics among the social scientists, which results in fewer interdisciplinary initiatives and an intellectual arrogance. So these are two quotes that sort of somewhat show the shift. And so John Maynard Keynes, he said, if economists could manage to get themselves thought of as humble, competent people on a level with dentists, that would be splendid. But Richard Freeman, much later, said sociologists and political scientists have less powerful analytical tools and know less than we do, or so we believe. By scores of the GRE and other criteria, our field attracts students that are stronger than theirs, and our courses are much more mathematically demanding. And so you see a shift on, thinking it would be nice if we could just be thought of as humble and on the level of dentist to something, some sort of superiority of being much better than the rest. And so this is shown manifests itself in many ways. So economists are the only social scientists to win a Nobel Prize. They command some of the highest levels of compensation, at least in American arts and sciences faculties. They earn more and have better career prospects than physicists and mathematicians, only second to computer scientists and engineers. Um, Unlike other academics in theoretical sciences or even the humanities, many prominent economists have the opportunity to obtain income from private investment, from partnerships, membership on corporate boards, and even consulting fees. Finally, economists, are regularly found in the highest corridors of power. They make some of the most consequential policy decisions. So they lead reserve boards. They're often advising in ministries of finance and head the World Bank and IMF. And their views are widely circulated in popular culture. So in cable news and opinion columns, via predictions used by industry, and through forums such as the World Economic Forum. And lastly, the discipline's emphasis on mastering quantitative reasoning is widely interpreted as a sign of higher intellectual capabilities. So this sort of moral superiority, I think, prevents economics from reaching out to other disciplines, which again keeps the feedback loop alive and ensures that economics is resistant to change. And so this is just putting data to some of the statements above. So you can see at the 90th percentile that economists earn the most. And in fact, economics edged above engineering in the 90th percentile after the 2008 financial crisis, which in some way is very interesting. But yet, it's not like economists have solved all the economic problems. And in fact, they're still very poor at making economic predictions. So these are, GDP forecasts, and you can see on the left-hand side that economists frequently overestimate GDP and fail to recognize recessions. On the right-hand side, the dotted lines show predicted forecasts, and you see that they're much more optimistic than actual forecasts, especially for bailout countries. So here are some quotes that, that sort of shed light on the problem. So Earl Wilson in 1993 said, an economist is an expert who will know tomorrow why the things he predicted yesterday didn't happen. And this is another interesting one where John Galbraith said, we have two classes of forecasters, those who don't know and those who don't know, they don't know. And so I think there was one stat about the prediction abilities of economists. I think this one would be would summarize most accurately, which is economists at IMF were only able to predict 5 out of the 153 recessions from 1990 to 2015, and this is from an IMF report. And so there's lots of evidence of poor predictions. So on the left is poor predictions on Fed funds rate. The red line is actual. The dotted lines are predicted. And also the right is similar stuff on inflation. So what is economics missing because of this resistance to change? And so there are many dimensions we can look at. So the status quo currently in economics is neoclassical, or what macroeconomists would call the new Keynesian paradigm. But what is missing is that there are actually 9 schools of economic thought. So there's developmentalist, Austrian, Schumpeterian, behaviorist. So we're missing really insight and inputs from those. In inference, economics stresses and emphasizes causal inference. But what about descriptive and predictive inference? On approaches, economics uses a lot of mathematical theory and is quantitative. But what about mixed method approaches, system-based approaches, or system thinking, theory-based approaches, and using theories of change, and adaptive approaches that are more iterative and focus on continuous learning? On techniques, a lot of economics papers today, use randomized control trials or quasi-experiments, such as, either instrumental variables or propensity matching or regression discontinuity design. But what about machine learning or GIS or geospatial data, systems mapping or process tracing, or more qualitative work like positive deviance, case studies, or user journeys? So these things are missing. In terms of gender, economics is predominantly male, or at least economists are predominantly male. But what about women economists, or even LGBTQ economists? In terms of race, again, economists are generally white. But what about those economists that are non-white? In terms of region, again, economists are concentrated in developed countries, but we're missing the perspective from developing countries. And in terms of the labor market, economics is really the study of formal work. But what about the informal care economy that really captures a large part of people in the world? So we're missing a lot of perspective because of this resistance to change. And this brings us to the last part, which is, what can we do to make this better, or what should change, and what are some levers to change this resistance? And so here are 5 potential levers. The first one is changing how journals are ranked, and this really goes back to the very first feedback loop. So the idea here would be for top journals to be the ones that have the most citations in social sciences and not simply in economics. This naturally will allow more interdisciplinary focus, and there should be some additional criteria to give better ranks to journals that encourage new cutting edge ideas and methodologies that be better for you. What this will do is, if top journals are encouraging more multidisciplinary work and also new cutting edge ideas, and PhD departments looking to publish in these top journals will also recruit students of more diverse backgrounds, students with more diverse backgrounds, coming from other social sciences, say political science or history, will have, bring a new kind of thinking to economics. And, that thinking, when reflected in the journals, will eventually permeate in economics departments and make them much more rich and much more open to change. That's the first recommendation. Second is to make economists disclose conflict of interest engagements. This is again to address the perverse feedback loops we were speaking about, in which a lot of economists tend to receive fees or on the boards of top financial firms. The idea would be for every publication by an economist to disclose all their affiliations, board membership, private investment, and so on and so forth. The third recommendation comes from what we discussed with insularity. So to transition to an individually managed hiring system for economics professors, as opposed to the current one, which is collectively managed, so that we allow for more debate on what a good economist can be, and we sort of are more open-minded on hiring different kinds of economists, which is exactly how hiring takes place in political science or sociology, because typically in the social sciences, uh, there's a lot more debate on what, good a good professor means, and there are a lot of, different ways of looking at the same problem. The fourth way is to institute a quota for non-elite schools in the top 50. So this is again tackling a different part of insularity, which is the concentration of the top 5 economic departments in the top journals, and PhDs from top 5 economic departments in top journals, but also how professional associations like the American Economics Association has about 70% people from top departments. So this, bringing in more diversity of thought from other schools would help. And finally, adding more diversity, so accepting more women and non-white economists, I think, would go a long way in bringing in more diverse perspectives. The homogeneity of the kind of people in the economics department means there is a sameness in the kind of economics we study. And so with that, this is the end of the video. So hope you enjoyed watching, and thank you so much for listening.